little bit with your epidural. I couldn't even. I was like, are my legs still there? Like,
you touch it and it feels like this big piece of ham or something.
Yes. It was so bad. So like Matt had to like hold up my legs. I'm like, and then the whole time I was like, I'm paralyzed. I'm like in my head. And they were like, would you just shut up? You're like giving birth right now. And I was like, I'm paralyzed. They're like, stop.
Okay.
I got your mugs.
I
love this mug. It's got pears and apples.
It's so cute.
I love it.
Mine's, Nashville. Never been, but was given. Oh, Nicole!
I know. I got
that's so cute. Is that from your trip?
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Nice.
I'm obsessed. I don't know. It's like the 50th year or so. I don't know. It was like
cute.
a birthday at Disney, and I was like, this is the cutest thing I've ever seen.
I love that.
Guys, this is a good mug combo. So, cheers, Mama.
Cheers.
Okay, welcome back to the Love That Journey Mama podcast. We are here and ready to share birth stories part 2 so that Nicole can share her birth stories, and then Sam and I can also touch on our postpartum experiences in the hospital, since we both had longer stays, at least for one of yours, right, Sam?
Yeah.
So we're just going to jump right back in, and Nicole, take it away.
Woo! Okay. Birth stories. This is my favorite topic. So I have 2 girls, 7 and 5, and both of their labors and births were very similar, which I was really surprised about because everybody says that, they could be quite different from one another. My pregnancies are really complicated, and it goes far back. So basically with each pregnancy, it all makes sense because it leads up to like my birth. But basically with each pregnancy, I was put on bed rest at 20 weeks with each girl. I kept going into preterm labor. Like I was having these contractions and it was dilating my cervix. And at one point, with both of them, like my water bag was bulging. So I was put on bed rest. Now, typically during these situations, like when your water bag is bulging and stuff, they'll put in like a cerclage, which is like a stitch in your cervix, to like hold everything together. So with Lena, my first, it was too late. We discovered it like 1 week too late. So I couldn't get the stitch. So they're like, just go on bed rest. And then with my second, Lucia, looking back, I should have switched practices and I should have pushed for a cerclage, knowing that my situation before was really high risk and very stressful. But they kept reassuring me that everything is fine, everything is fine, everything is fine. But at the same exact time, it was like 21 weeks, 1 week too late, the same exact thing happened. So that's just some context because I think my body wanted to get these kids out from the jump. So
I'm just curious, is bed rest like you really are just stuck in bed, or is that exactly what it is?
Yes. Like I thought the same thing, Ashley. I was like, okay, what? So I just like have to take it easy. Like don't vacuum or, carry laundry baskets. No, they were like, you need to be in bed on your back for at least 80% of the day. And with Lena, my first, I was like, okay, I was teaching at the time, but it was like a welcome. I'm like, okay, I can watch all the shows, read all the books, take time for myself before I have a baby. Like, let's turn this into a good thing. Then when I had Lucia, it's like I have an 18-month-old. No, she was like 12 months. She was a year old. I'm like, I have a 1-year-old at home. How am I going to do this? So that was a whole mess. But yes, it is just strictly you have to stay in bed. It
Wow.
was insane. It was so insane. And it was a lot, but my body just, I think, wanted to get them out as fast as possible. So when my labors came around, they were really quick and very, very quick. So it's called, I looked it up, precipitous or precipitous. I don't know, precipitous. Where your labors happen within, I think it was like under 6 hours from the beginning to the birth. And the first time it happened with Lena, Matt's a firefighter, so my husband's a firefighter, and we had like our backup plan. What if he's on shift and I go into labor in the middle of the night? His parents would come get me. But we always figured like it's not that big of a deal. We have plenty of time because, you know, usually when you go into labor, especially with your first, it's like it takes a while. It takes a while. No. I woke up at 3:30 in the morning. I rolled over. My water broke everywhere. I called the station. Nobody's answering. I called the cell phone. Nobody's answering. And immediately I start having really painful contractions, like where I'm doubled over. The hospital is an hour away.
I thought 40 minutes was bad.
We have 10 minutes away, so I guess I'm the lucky one here.
That's the way to do it. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking, but I think I thought like, oh, I'll have plenty of time, you know, just labor at home, mosey our way. Oh, no. So he's not answering, and I'm calling his parents, and his dad picks up, and I was like, you guys gotta come get me. And so they come pick me up, and finally Matt answers. We meet halfway, and I was like, you need to blow every single red light. Like, I know what Ashley was saying before, like, you need, and he was. There was nobody on the road. It was like, by this time, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was screaming. I'm like, this baby is going to come right now.
We're going to be on the news.
Like, seriously, I was like, this can't be happening. So we made it. He didn't even like park. We just like pull up to the entrance that we thought we were supposed to go in. We just run in. There's no wheelchairs. So I walk myself up to labor and delivery at like the 4th floor or whatever. And I check in, and I was like, I'm on the floor at this point. I'm like, oh my gosh. And the nurse, God bless nurses. This nurse was so rude to me. She's like, is this your first? And I was like, yes, like crying and screaming. And she's like, and when did your contractions start? And I was like, an hour ago, maybe. And she's like, get up. Like, she was treating me like I was being like dramatic.
Oh God.
And I was like crying. I was like looking at Matt, and I was like, what? So she gets me in the room. She checks my cervix, and she's like, you are 8 centimeters. And then she apologized. She's like, I am so sorry. She's like, a woman down the hall is like a 1/4 centimeter dilated, and she's acting like you, where she's like on the floor. She's like, this is your first. I just thought like, and I was like, oh my God.
But like either way, like pain is pain.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what I was thinking. I was like, even if this woman down the hall is a 1/4 centimeter and she's doing that, like, this is painful. You cannot treat laboring women. I'm glad she apologized, but then I felt bad for the woman down the hall because I was like, this poor thing. Yeah. So I was like 8 centimeters, and then I started freaking out. I'm like, I can't get an epidural now. Like, I'm screwed. This isn't going to work. And thankfully, the anesthesiologist was right next door. They pulled him before he could even start the woman next to me. And they're like, just go do Nicole really quick. It didn't work the first time, so we had to come back and do it another time. And then, Ashley, I think you were talking about this, where it was like half, right? Like half of your body.
It never really got to one side, no matter like how they shifted me.
It was similar. So it was all of my right side that was numb. My left wasn't. And they just kept pushing more and more and more. So then it did work, but it got to the point where I had like dead legs. That's what they were calling it, where I could not, you can feel a little bit with your epidural. I couldn't even, I was like, are my legs still there? Like,
you touch it and it feels like this big piece of ham or something.
Yes. It was so bad. So like Matt had to like hold up my legs. I'm like, and then the whole time I was like, I'm paralyzed. I'm like in my head. And they were like, would you just shut up? You're like giving birth right now. And I was like, I'm paralyzed. They're like, stop. So all of this this all happened within probably, I want to say like 40 minutes, because she was born, I can't even remember their exact times, but she was born within like 4.5 hours of when my water broke, getting to the hospital and doing all of that. And Sam, you said this, one of your babies was sunny side up, right?
First one, yeah.
Okay. So she was sunny side up, but I had no idea, no clue. Nobody told me anything, but she came out. I pushed her out, and with like 2 pushes, she was out, but she had like this big cone head, and they were like, she was sunny side up, and this could have gone so many other ways. And I mean, I tore really, really bad, which I really didn't know was a thing. Like, I knew it was a thing, but I forgot it was a thing. And
I think when you're in that moment, all you're thinking about is like, get this baby out, and you're not thinking about everything else.
Exactly. And like, I just remember hearing about it and learning about it in like my childhood classes, like, okay, that happens. But I don't know. It never crossed my mind before giving birth, but I tore completely. So there's like 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd and 4th. It was a 4th right through. It was the most painful. And my doctor was stitching me up I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing down there? Like, I'm just laying here with my baby. And she's like, this is a pretty bad. I was like, oh, okay. Having no idea. Yeah. So it was intense, but I didn't realize that in and of itself is traumatic, because there's not enough time to process what's happening. And in birth is traumatic in and of itself, because we've never experienced it, and it never goes the way we think it's going to. But to instantly be like, okay, my water broke, and this baby is coming, and now it's coming out, and like I had this epidural, there was just no free second for me to be like, okay, like, we're gonna have a baby and everything is fine. It was just like, all of a sudden it was like, oh, baby's in my arm, and it was just a whirlwind. And I remember, when they transfer you to your postpartum floor, I was just sobbing, and the nurses are like, what's wrong? Like, you did great. It was so fast. You're like the poster child for labor, and your baby is healthy. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I can't appreciate what I have in front of me, because I'm trying to process how fast everything went. I just didn't have 1 second to myself to be like, okay, we're having a baby today. This is great. And it was intense. But all that to say that I think it was that way because my body just was basically in preterm labor the entire pregnancy. So I should have known that my labors were going to be really quick, but yeah. So that was Lena, and Lucia was pretty similar. With her, I went into like serious preterm labor at 28 weeks.
So more bed rest.
More bed rest. I had an appendectomy when I was pregnant with her. So I had appendicitis.
What?
So bad. I woke up one morning, I had this pain. I'm like, whatever. We always have pain when we're pregnant. Go to the doctor. It's getting worse. I have a fever, all this. They're like, you have appendicitis. So they had to call in a special team. It was like the middle of the night. I couldn't even get like the regular anesthesia because you're pregnant. So it was a mess. It was a mess. And they said, you know, having your appendix taken out when you're pregnant like this could cause you to go into labor. I'm like, I'm 28 weeks. Like, no, ma'am, no. Yeah. So I got through it. Everything was fine. I went home. I was okay. But the next day I started having contractions. And that's when my water was like 2 seconds from breaking. It was so bad. So yeah, so that was like serious bed rest. I was actually in the hospital for, I want to say like 2 weeks because they had to give me all these medications to stop it and like put my feet, you know, like it's a real thing. They like put your feet above your head and you're like laying down in the bed.
Above your head?
Mm-hmm. It's called like the Trendelberg position. So when you're in your bed, they literally tilt the bed completely. So your
using
head
gravity to keep that baby in there.
And your legs are up here.
Doesn't that make like all the blood rush to your head?
It was super uncomfortable, but to me, I was like, this is some medieval stuff. Like they're like, no, we still do this. I'm like, okay. Wow. It worked because my water bag went back up. It stopped bulging. The baby like went back up. I think the medications helped also, but it was, yeah, that was intense.
And you had all this going on plus a baby at home.
Yeah, she was, so I got pregnant with Lucia when Lena was 8 months old. So she was a year at this point. Yeah, it was intense. So I knew, I had a feeling that Lucia's labor was going to be very similar. I was hoping it wouldn't, but I had a feeling. It was Saturday night going into Father's Day, Sunday. And I started having contractions at home. My water didn't break this time. So it's different, right? Like when your water breaks, you know, okay, my water broke, like we've got to move it. And then the contraction. Yeah. But being in preterm labor this whole time, I'm like, okay, well, I've been having contractions this whole time that have been painful. So I don't know. But so they started, and then within maybe 15 minutes of them starting, it was like the same thing with Lena. I was like doubled over. I'm like, we're not going to make it. We're still an hour away from the hospital. I'm calling the on-call doctor who, you know, is never your doctor.
Right.
And he doesn't know my history or situation. And he's like, your contractions just started. Like, you need to stay home, labor at home. Your doctor will be on call in the morning by the time you get in. And I was like, okay. I hang up and I looked at Matt and I was like, no, like this isn't going to work. So I gave it another like 10 minutes, but within those 10 minutes, I'm like, this baby is coming. Like, she is coming. I call him back. He was like, if you want to go, just get checked out. It'll just make you feel more comfortable. And I was like, can you be there? Because I'm going to give birth to this baby, whether you're there or not. Thinking, like I'm thinking he's saying like, oh, we'll just go get checked by the nurses. You'll go home and he'll just stay in bed. I was like, no, you need to come. So he's like, yeah, like I'll be there. So same thing, we get there and he actually did come in, thank God. And he was similar to the nurse that I had the first time where he checked me and he was like, you were 8 centimeters. He was like, you called me like, you know, an hour ago. I was like, yeah, I know. I don't know what to tell you.
They act as if this doesn't happen. Like,
yeah. I feel like it must not happen.
I mean, it was the same with my second. I mean, my water broke and I was 10 centimeters within an hour. Right, and he was born like 40 minutes later. So yeah, it's possible.
I don't understand. Like they are, and all the nurses were like, what? You just called him an hour ago? Like everybody's all so confused. And they're like, well, you had to have been in labor yesterday, like all day. And I was like, no, I wasn't. Like, no.
Why are they wasting time trying to like get the story straight.
I had a nurse tell me actually when I went in with my first, because I like walked my way into the birthing center and I was 6 centimeters, and she was like, "Wow, you must have a really high pain tolerance." And I was like,
right?
Do I? Because like, I guess that's the thing. I don't know.
They said the same thing to me, Sam, and in my head, I'm like, but what choice do we have? We didn't have a choice, and we don't know any different. Right?
We didn't know.
And we have to get there. So it's like, well, what are we going to do? So they were all like, oh, wow. So they broke my water. He broke it. And he's like, okay, I'm going to go rest. Like, I'm going to go to sleep in the on-call room. Usually after I break your water, it still takes like a couple of hours. So just let the nurse know, like, if you're feeling any pressure, like you want to push. He gets to the door. So he breaks it, tells me all this. He walks to the door. And I was like, I feel pressure. And they're like, we just, like, that's a whole other topic of discussion is, like, not believing women and not listening to, like, what we're saying and making me feel like I'm crazy. The gaslighting is insane. They're all like, I just broke your water. We just walked to the door. And I was like, I'm gonna push this baby. And he's like, oh, like, he's so frustrated. He's like, I'm just trying to sleep, lady, you know.
Like, we're trying to sleep too here, okay?
I know.
Why is he even telling you that? I feel like we shouldn't know when they nap.
That is the other thing. I was like, this is super. I found out later that I was his last patient, and he, like, had resigned from the practice, and he was, like, moving out of state, and I was his last patient. One of the nurses told me that. She's like, I think he was just, like, checked out, but he was so clear, and he was so nice. He was actually, like, really nice, but he was so frustrated. He's like, I just broke your water, Nicole. And I was like, okay, well, either I'm about to poop on the table or my baby's coming. Like, I don't know what to tell you. He was like, okay, I'll just check it. And he comes over and he's like, oh, she's coming out. I'm like, okay. Thank you very much. Like, that's what I've been trying to tell you.
Me.
Yeah.
Come on. So then they're rushing around like, wow, this is happening so fast. And she was not sunny side up. Thank goodness. I told him right before I started pushing, I was like, listen, buddy, I tore a 4 last time, and that's not happening again. And he was so good. He was so gentle, and he's like, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. And he was really, really good. I don't know what he did. I didn't even ask, but I tore like maybe a 2, which whatever.
Better than a 4.
Yeah, better than a 4. So I pushed her out again in like 2 pushes.
Jeez.
She comes out, and Matt, I look at my husband, who's a firefighter paramedic, and he turns like white. And he's shaking his head, and I was like, what's wrong? Oh my God, what is wrong? And then he started like swaying, and they're like, he's going to pass out. And I thought something was wrong with the baby. So they give her me, she's fine. And he had to like go sit down. They put him on the couch. They had laid him down. They started giving him juice and crackers, and they were making fun of him. I was like, you are a paramedic. What are you doing? He's like, I don't know.
What happened to my husband with the second one? And I was like, the first you were fine. The second one, they had to take him out of the operating room as I'm being sliced open to give him juice because he was going to faint.
Like juice and crackers,
Why
right?
The second?
I don't know. I was like, you should be ready for this. I don't know.
Maybe that's part of it. Like with the first, they're so like amped up because it's like the first one, and the second, I don't know. The second for him too, he was shaking his head, and I was like, what?
So what you're saying is I should pack juice for the future.
Pack some protein bars.
Give him a chair. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Well, the funny part too for me, like it was a C-section, right? So there's a lot going on. He's next to me, and then the next thing I know, he's not in the room. And I kind of like looking around, there's a lot going on. And I was like, and finally one of the nurses came over, like, he's not feeling great. We had to take him out of the room. And I'm like, what? Like his son's about to be born, and he had to like go get his.
You're like, you're not feeling great. On the table.
Yeah. I still make fun of him to it for this day. So
Me too. He's always
As you should. Yeah.
Yes.
It's like, remember when I was giving birth and you almost fainted? Good times.
It is wild.
I wonder what it looks like on the other end. I'm like, I guess I would maybe I would pass out too. I don't know.
Well, did Brian look? Because Eric refused to look. Like both C-section, the doctor was like, "Hey, Dad, you want to take a look?" And he was like, "No."
Like look on the other side of the curtain?
Yeah.
No.
They asked if he wanted to look like while they were like pulling the baby out.
I think he was too freaked out because I was so far gone. Like, he's talked about before that push-pull of like, go see your baby, but also your wife is like really messed up. So yeah, he stayed on the other side.
So did Eric. But it was funny because for the second one, I was like, do you want to look? Like, I'm curious. Like, I have weird, morbid curiosity. So, like, I feel like I would want to see. And I told him, I was like, even if you don't want to look, just, like, lift up your phone and take a picture because I want to see.
So I can see it. I would be the same way.
Yeah, and he was like, no, absolutely not. And I was like, well, now I'm never going to get to know what it looks like. So.
You're like making me nauseous thinking about
Sorry.
I know. I feel like it would be really good to have the husbands on one day to give their perspective of birth.
Yeah, watching what it was like.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we just cycle that in every now and then, the husband's perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lucia comes into the world. And...
She comes in. It's Father's Day. Yeah, I was like, happy Father's Day. I'm never giving you another gift ever again. This is the best gift you could ever have. Yep. And so he's laying on the couch and, you know, I hold her for a minute. They take her away to like go weigh her, clean her up. And usually Matt's there with the camera, like doing all the pictures. And the nurse was like, give me the camera. Like, I'll do it because he's over here.
Being useless.
Yeah. So she's taking all the pictures. And yeah, I mean, same with Lena. It was in 4 hours. And it's interesting because I'm a triplet.
What?
So, really? Yeah.
I can't wait for the multiples episode. I know. You want to do one. I have so many questions.
So I have 2 sisters. There's 3 girls, and we're really close. So I didn't even get a chance to tell them that I was even in labor. So all of a sudden they wake up to pictures with each of the girls. Like when I had Lena, it's like, here she is. They're like, what? Like, you didn't call us or tell us. Like, we didn't have a chance to go to the hospital. Like, there was no time for either one. And I just think of it, like, on the other side of things, my sister had a baby last year. And it was different. Like, we couldn't go to the hospital because of COVID, but it was a longer process. And we knew she was in labor. So we were able to, like, check in on her and call her and text her and stuff. And I can't imagine like going to bed and then getting a text the next morning, like, here's the baby. I'd be like, oh my God. So it was intense because there was no opportunity for me to like rely on my support system of like my mom. My mom was able to make it for 5 minutes with Lena because she lived right by the hospital. I was like, you better come if you want to see me before. And she like popped her head in, and then it was time to push. So she left. But yeah, they were both really, really fast, traumatic in its own way, just to process, not being able to have a second to think about, you know, what's coming in front of you. But I'm thankful. I'm thankful that, you know, they weren't super complicated. Considering my pregnancies were really, really difficult, I'm very thankful that my labors were pretty uneventful for the most part. Yeah. And then, you know, when they take you to the postpartum floor, that's a whole other world down there. There's just so much. I feel like
Did you have good stays, mediocre, bad?
So, okay. I would say both. When I had my ectopic years ago before my girls, I went to the same hospital and I was put on the postpartum floor. for my recovery. And I had this amazing nurse, Amy. Her name is Amy. And we bonded, we connected. I reached out to her on Facebook. We exchanged numbers. I had Lena, and she was my postpartum nurse for Lena for one day, which was amazing. And then same with Lucia. She was there with Lucia too, for the one day. So that was so special because she had seen my entire journey of losing a baby and then each of the births. And actually, she was my nurse for my hysterectomy also.
Wow.
She was there through my whole journey. And I'll share pictures one day, but I have pictures with each of my girls. She's holding each of them. So that was super special. And she was there each morning that I was transferred to the postpartum floor. So that was like, it's like your mom away from, it's your hospital mom. So that was really, really wonderful. When she would go home, it was really difficult because I felt like I really struggled with breastfeeding, really struggled. And the nurses were not patient with me at all about it. I didn't feel like I was getting any support for that's what they're supposed to do, right?
So when they would go home.
Yeah, so when Amy went home and I had like the night nurses, it was really hard because I couldn't get either of them to latch and breastfeed, and I just needed support and assistance. And it was just kind of like, they make you wait when you're ringing the bell and they're really frustrated. So my nighttime experience was not ideal. It was really difficult. And then you're just more emotional at night anyways. So the postpartum floor I have a whole lot of experiences from there, but I want to hear your two experiences with your postpartum because you had C-sections. So that's a whole different, like I was up and walking and, going to the bathroom and within a couple hours. So
yeah, it's weird. So for me, having two C-sections, with the first one being like pushing and then C-section, which was like different types of body trauma, right? Because it was like, I feel like I was hit by a truck and then also cut open. So it was like, I was in the hospital for 5 days with Julian after giving birth. And a lot of that was he had jaundice. So he was doing like the bilirubin, like his numbers weren't right. And he also wasn't eating and gaining weight. So they wanted to keep him longer. They were running tests. I was struggling to breastfeed as well. Mm-hmm. And we had lactation consultants coming in. So it was like, yes. And like and that's a whole other topic. I just could not, like, it's something either with my body or what, but I was not able to. And very traumatic experience. We were doing formula at the same time, but so I couldn't get out of bed. I think because I had the epidural first, right, from pushing. Then my epidural was running out, so they gave me more, and then they decided, oh, it's time for a C-section. So then they like hit me with more anesthesia, and I was just, I think I mentioned in my last, like when we were talking birth stories part 1, I was in like this weird foggy twilight where I ended up like passing out on the operating table. So recovery was a lot slower that time because I think my body was just completely shut down, and I don't think I got out of the actual hospital bed for like at least 2 days. Like I had a catheter and everything. Like I just could not get up. Like they had those like,
I was going to say, did they have those
automatic things on your legs?
On your legs.
Like circulation? Yeah, because they were worried about me with like blood clots and stuff. So that was hard. And I think also because it was, first baby, middle of a pandemic. Yeah. Like the hospital was like a ghost town. It was really weird. Like when he was born, because there's no visitors. So it's not like there was even like bustling activity. I'm pretty sure they were just running like a skeleton crew of nurses because of that. So it was like, we were getting visits from the nurses, but it was very brief. There wasn't a lot of interaction. There was maybe like 2 other babies on the floor. Like it was very quiet. It was very surreal in a way because you always just picture it being like a bustling like hub of activity in the hospital. And it was very ghost towny. And I think that kind of added to the sadness and grief that I was already feeling, because it also just felt very isolating.
Mm-hmm.
So that was hard. And we did finally get, let out at the 5-day mark, which I was a little annoyed because we were told at the 4th day. I was already getting up and walking at that point, and I was getting around, which that was weird. Getting out of bed to walk for the first time after having a C-section, where you it's like I was like,
you'll never walk again.
I felt like a toddler, like taking my first steps. Like it was so weird to be like, whoa, my legs. And also the first time like seeing what was going on down there, because obviously you can't see it. And then as your stomach starts to shrink in the first couple of days, I mean, obviously you still look like 6 months pregnant, but I was able to actually see like the sutures and everything and the bandaging. And that was really weird, because I was just like, whoa. But yeah, I was a little annoyed because on day 4, we were told we were going home. And then, we're waiting for the discharge paperwork and everything. And then by like 4 p.m., they were like, we're keeping you an extra day. And I was like, what? Like, why were we told by the other nurse we were going home? We found out later it was because the head lactation consultant said that she wanted to try teaching me to breastfeed for 1 more day. So she kept us there. And I was like, shouldn't that have been discussed with me though? Because like I was slowly coming to terms with the fact we had already started him on formula. Mm-hmm. I was pumping. Nothing was really coming at that point. Because that's another thing. And I don't know how true this is. I don't know, Ashley, what your take is on this, but I was told when you have a C-section, because your baby doesn't come out vaginally, it doesn't trigger your body to start producing milk, because it's like a hormone thing.
There's a lot missing there when they don't come out.
Because of like nature, your body's like, oh, we just gave birth, time to start producing milk. So it takes longer for your milk to come in after a C-section, because your body hasn't like figured out what's going on yet. So my milk wasn't coming in, even though I was pumping, and I think I was just trying to like, stimulate everything. So in the meantime, we're giving him formula, and he still wasn't eating great. And I think a lot of it was because of the jaundice, because he just wanted to sleep, right? And they were like, oh, you have to feed him, you have to feed him. I was like, we're trying everything. Like we're literally putting it in his mouth, and they're like, you got to wake him up to feed him. And we're like, what can we do? Like we would like take off his clothes, and I was like blowing on his face, and I was tickling him and doing all the things. Like obviously it's a newborn baby. Like what can you really do to wake him up? So, but like he was finally starting to eat and gain weight, and we thought everything was fine. And then that's what annoys me. She kept us there an extra day because she was like convinced that I could breastfeed. And I was like finally like becoming okay with the fact that I'm gonna go home. He's eating formula, like it's fine. And I was like, that's not like, I don't know, just put a bad taste in my mouth, right? Because I was like, she's not even a doctor. Like it wasn't like a health concern. It was just like she was so adamant that I wanted to breastfeed. Yeah, and I was like, hey man, like I want to breastfeed too, but you know what I want to do even more? Go home.
That puts
and if it's not happening, it's not happening, and it's okay, and everybody will be okay, and
or like just let us go home and I'll come back. And I did. Exactly. I came back for outpatient lactation services because I was trying, and so it was a little bit. Yeah, I didn't care for that. So when we had Jamie, I straight up told the lactation consultants, I was like, hey, like this is my history with breastfeeding with my first. I'm going to give it the old college try, but like I've already told myself, like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We're doing formula. I'm not going down that road again of like pushing my body to try to do things that I can't do and just going down that rabbit hole. So my recovery with Jamie was like, it was like a night and day, right? So hospital for 5 days with Julian, couldn't even get out of bed for 2 days. I was like learning how to function as a human again. With Jamie, I had my C-section. Yeah, he was born Friday night, 11:20 p.m. He was taken out. And then I was up walking around by noon the next day. So it was like, I don't know if it's because I didn't try the whole pushing and epidural and all that, so my body didn't have as much to recover from, or because I had gone through it before. So it was almost just like, okay, I know I can do this. And then I literally Sunday morning was like, I'm ready to go home. Like, let me go home.
Like, let's go.
Because their thing with C-sections is they want you minimum 2 nights in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And because he was born at 11:20 p.m. on Friday, I was like, well, technically that was night 1. And they're like, well, we don't really count that because you weren't even like healed and like wheeled up to the room until, after midnight. And I was like, yeah, but
I was here.
I was still
And if you feel ready, that's what matters most.
Right. And I think a lot of it too was the mental push to get home because I missed Julian because Julian was at home.
Right.
And what we did the second time around is my husband came to the hospital. So when I went into labor, it was at night. So my sister came, spent the night so that when Julian woke up Saturday morning, my sister was here. But he was going through a lot of like big emotions at the time, as most, almost 2-year-olds are. So we decided my husband was going to go home for bedtime, like to be there. So he was with us in the hospital during the day, but then come like 5 p.m. he would leave, go home, relieve my sister, and then do dinner and bedtime and all that because we wanted Julian to have that familiarity and consistency. Because we were like, the last thing we want to do is like leave in the middle of the night where he wakes up like, where's mom and dad? And then show up 2 days later with like, here's a new baby, and him be like, what? So we were like, at least if like dad's with him and it's like, he FaceTimed me then and I was able to kind of show Julian like the baby, and he didn't really understand, but it was still kind of like keeping some level of familiarity. So we did that. So I was ready to get home, right? Because it was just me and Jamie in the hospital. And I was like, let's go home. And like, we're only half of our family. Like I want to get to the other side, like be a family of 4. So I think a lot of that was also my determination to get out. And I had a much better recovery the second time around. I will say the hardest part though is with a C-section, you're not supposed to lift anything heavier than your baby for weeks. And
6
so
weeks.
6 weeks. They said definitely 2. And when I went in for my 2 weeks, she was like, yeah, you probably should, because I told her, I was like, it's been torture not being able to lift my toddler because he doesn't understand. He wants mama to pick him up. And I'm like, I can't, buddy, sorry. But he sees me holding the baby and it's like, So I went against doctor's orders, and luckily, I mean, I'm grateful that I didn't screw anything up because I was definitely picking up Julian within like the 3rd week mark. Because I was like, I can't and I felt better, but I also know a lot of that is like superficial, right? Because I don't know what's going on internally. And I had nightmares about being like burst open at the seams. So it was like this whole thing of like, I don't want to damage anything, but I also was like, it's so hard not being able to hold him and not being able to explain to him in a way that he understands why I can't hold him. Mm-hmm. So that was just, it was a lot, but I think that had like that mental, like strong, like determination that I was going to do it. So
I have a question, Sam. Yeah. Was Julian able to visit the hospital?
No.
Me? Okay, I didn't think so. So
when
that
James was born, they were allowing, because this was back in August, so they were allowing 1 visitor at a time by the time he was born, but only 18 and older.
Okay.
So no children.
See, that's with Lucia, Lena, it was years ago. So she was able to come. My mom came and we spent the afternoon together and she met the baby. So it's completely
that would have been nice.
Different. Yeah.
I might have stayed an extra day, Ben, because I was like so anxious to get home to him that
Right. Understandably. Yeah.
And that's honestly, I mean, I think we talked about this in like our first episode. Like I don't like being away from my kids. So like I never had spent a night away from Julian. So that was also really tough, like wanting to get back home to them. So I will say the one thing that I did differently too with Jamie. So I remember it actually, so I don't know, Nicole, do you know, so Ashley's cousin Adam and my cousin Christina are married. That's how we like know each other.
Ashley,
yes. And I remember Christina and Adam telling me when I was pregnant the first time, take advantage of the nursery like overnight. And they're like, I know you want to keep the baby with you in the room. They're like, but trust me, because you're never going to sleep again. Like when you get home with the baby. Yeah. So like take advantage if you can to try to rest in the hospital. And when Julian was born, obviously first time mom here, I'm like, no, absolutely not. Like this baby's staying with me 24/7. So I did not want anyone to take him. And my husband was there too. So it was a trade-off because I couldn't get out of bed to go to him when he was crying in the little hospital bassinet thing for the first 2 days. So my husband did all that and he would, hand him to me in the bed and stuff like that. with Jamie, because it was just me and Jamie at night, because my husband left, the first night I was holding him and I put him in his little bassinet, and then I would recline the little bed, try to sleep. He'd start crying, push the little bed up, get him out. And I'm trying to do all this like from the bed, right? Because like my legs are still like jelly. And I'm like, I'm not going to hold a baby with like no one else in the room in case, I fall. So like hours go by. I started to actually get like hallucinations because I hadn't slept, because both my kids were born in the middle of the night. So I didn't get any sleep for like 48 hours. Like
terrible.
Yeah. Why couldn't you come at like 3 p.m. or something?
Right.
But, so yeah, because he was born at like, 11:20 p.m. and then it's like the whole recovery and you get to the room. And then I think we maybe slept for like an hour. But that first bit in the hospital when you're getting constantly checked by the nurses and stuff, I was like, I don't think I slept. So by the time the nighttime rolled around, at that point, I'm up for 48 hours on my own with a newborn. And I was holding him, I remember, on my chest. And I did that thing, which I don't know if either of you guys have ever done this, where you're like so sleep deprived, where you like zone out and all of a sudden you realize like a half hour's gone by and you're like, oh my God. And I did that thing where I looked down and I was holding him and he was okay. But I was like,
where was I?
So poorly, like if I like dropped him or something, like I was getting nervous. And so I was like, I think I have to call the nurses. And I called, she's the sweetest little old lady. Her name was Sue. She had to have been in her 70s. She said she never wanted to retire because she just loved being around babies. She was so nice. I called her at like midnight and I was like, can you please come take him for a couple hours so I can sleep? And she was like, oh my gosh, of course, don't worry about it. She wheeled him out and the nursery was closed still. I guess they closed it during COVID, never opened it back up. I didn't know that. So she kept him with her at the nurse's station. And she said her and the other night nurses, they had like 2 other little babies in their little bassinets sitting at the nurse's station with them.
So cute.
I was able to sleep. I remember waking up on my own and actually getting up out of the bed and going to like brush my teeth and like use the bathroom. And I was like, wow, I like slept for a few hours and I was able to like wake up on my own. I get back into bed, I order my breakfast, and then she comes wheeling him in at like, like 7 a.m. She's like, here's Mom. And I was like, oh my God. She was so sweet. And she was like, I remember her telling me that they had a few babies and she's like, he was just like so content. Like the other babies were on and off crying. She's like, he just kind of was looking around and all the nurses were in love with him. And I was like, oh. So I mean, God bless labor and delivery nurses and postpartum, like whatever, just all the nurses involved, because I had so many great nurses. And that was the one thing that I was glad that I got over. And there was a lot of things that I got over with having a second kid, of things that like I would have never considered with the first, where now I'm just like, maybe I'll try this. So that was one of them where I was like, I'm just going to let them take him.
I was the same, Sam. At first, I was like, no. And then I was like, please take her because I'm going home and I'm going to have 2 and just do it.
That was the other thing, too. I was like, I'm probably not going to sleep for the next like 6 months. So please just take him for a few hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, just overall, the postpartum process in the hospital with Julian was like this weird out-of-body trauma nightmare that like still cycles through my brain. Is like, was that even real life? Like, it doesn't even feel real to me because I was so disconnected from the whole experience. And I think that probably was why I had really bad postpartum depression too, because none of it felt tangible. I don't know if that even makes sense. It was just a very bizarre time, like from the birth to the after, like just the whole process. And that just led into, a few months of just really bad postpartum depression, where Jamie, I don't know if it was just because I was more prepared and my body was more prepared and I was mentally more prepared, and just in general, it was such a better experience. There is always going to be a little bit of sadness that I didn't attempt a VBAC, because I'll never know now, because that was our last baby. And like, I knew going into it, that was our last one. So I always wonder how that, like, just curious, like to see what my body's capable of. Like, I would have been curious to see what that was, but it is what it is. And, I've had 2 C-sections. I healed perfectly fine. I have 2 healthy kids, and, where we're at now today, like looking back, like I said, there's always going to be that little bit of sadness around Julian's, but in the grand scheme of things, I can't complain. So that's that. So
thanks for sharing your postpartum hospital experience. Sam, I was nodding my head a lot like, yeah, that sounds similar.
Yeah.
So I think I mentioned in the previous video with Hadley that we were separated for 15 hours, which, I mean, that's the only experience I know. But when I tell people, they usually make a face because they're like, oh gosh, that is a long time.
Yeah.
But yes, we were separated for, I think the main reason being they needed to monitor her and her head due to those failed vacuum attempts for delivery. And then for me, I got the impression after a while that I just must have looked like or came across so on death's door after everything that happened. Because about, I don't know, 24 hours later, or once she was back in my arms and I was having that actual, like, you became a mom experience, the nurses would be like, wow, you look so much better, or like, you look like you're feeling a lot better. I'm like, wow, it must have been really bad because I mean, it's all I knew. And I will say, you know, those hours after she was born, because she was born a little before 8:30 the night before, and then I think a couple hours later, it's very fuzzy because I was just so out of it by the time she came out. Yeah, I got to see her that very brief moment in that space we don't quite know the name of, right? Like the one step below the NICU. So yeah, those hours afterwards when we were in our room, very fuzzy. I know that Brian and I were just so exhausted and out of it, and we knew that she wasn't going to be with us for a bit, so the goal was just to rest. So he, you know, got laid up on the little couch setup thing, and I was just dead in the bed, I think, attempting to get down some of that, you know, cranberry Sprite juice mix with all the ice. Like, I think just getting ice in my mouth was all I could do.
Yeah.
And then I remember at some point early, like late into the night or the early wee hours, I had fallen asleep and I was woken up by the pediatrician that had checked on or was checking up on her. So she needed to give me an update. But like, you know, I know people come in and out. I think I had really fallen asleep. So when she woke me up, I was just like in shock. She's like, I'm so sorry. And she's trying to be so sweet and quiet. And she's like, just want you to know that things are looking good with her head. You know, she isn't having any swelling and we think things are going to be okay. And I'm like, okay. But then, even though, I mean, I don't know this woman at all, she came out of nowhere, I just start bawling to her because I was just in shock from everything.
The hormones.
The hormones.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know. And we're just, you know, she's by the bed, it's dark, and we're just holding hands, and she's like, it's going to be okay. And I'm like, I'm just a mess. So that's why I think they were telling me later on, wow, you're looking so much better, because I was a wreck. And I will say, I feel I had a fantastic experience in the hospital, and maybe only came across like one nurse in all the rotations that was kind of hum-ho. But I feel that everyone I worked with, they served some sort of different purpose, whether it was to kind of be a little harsh with me and push me to get up out of bed, or was very mothering and taking care of me. So I feel so fortunate for that, because they really nursed me back to health, giving me, you know, whatever I needed, and just trying to extra care. And that's where I started to pick up on the fact that maybe the experience I had was a little abnormal, or maybe they should have gone a different route and not had me basically go through a terrible labor only to have a C-section. Because I just felt a little extra checked up on. And, you know, when I've compared to other people's experiences, I feel like maybe, Sam, yours is the closest I know to mine. so far that I've come across. But other people, it sounds that they're not as, I don't know, doted on as I was. So
yes.
Yeah, and I didn't feel like I was being a baby or anything. I just think they saw I was so far gone and they needed to like revive me. So, oh yeah, and because we were separated, they had no choice but to like be bottle feeding her formula from the start. But they wanted to try to get my milk supply to come in, so they brought in the pump and kind of taught me what to do. And I didn't know, I knew I was going to attempt to breastfeed and see how that went, but I wasn't sold on it. You know, it wasn't something where I thought I just, can't wait to do that. So I was coming at a different angle where I'm like, if it works, it works. Plus what you said, Sam, it can be harder for those things to kick in if you have a C-section. So miraculously, my milk started coming, or the colostrum started coming in. I'm not sure at what point, maybe halfway through my stay, because I was there 5 days to 4 nights, and about halfway through I was getting the colostrum. So no, this must have been before she was with me, because they took it to her.
Yeah. In the little syringe.
Yeah, the little syringe, a little tiny bit that came out. So yes, she was formula, and then as I started getting the colostrum, they were giving her those little drips. That morning, Brian went to go see her in that separate space, and he had, we were talking about it recently, he had the best time going to visit her and see his daughter for the first time, and kind of have that moment with her. And I was still like, I don't know what's going on. So I don't think I was too emotional about it at the time. And I don't know if you guys can relate to this, or have heard other people talk about it, because we were separated so long and I hadn't really made the connection yet that I had a baby and became a mom. Once they thought I was in a good enough space and she was healthy enough to be reunited, and they told me, they're like, oh, we're gonna bring her in around 3-ish or so, I got scared. I was like, oh no, I like really nervous to have that experience of being together.
That's completely.
Were you nervous in a way that you like were afraid you would like hurt her or something, or like nervous in what way?
I think
nervous like you're meeting somebody for the first time.
I was just gonna say you're like meeting her, right?
Yeah,
like
nervous of the reality check. I don't know if that's something with the hormones too, because she came out in like a traumatic surgery basically, that I don't know if I really truly made the connection that I had a baby. So the shock of my life changing in that way, it felt just confusing. So I got a little scared. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to meet my baby, and this is where it all changes. And but it was really cool, because when they brought her in, like Brian has told me before, that it's like everything changed. She really helped me heal more. So something in that connection, and they were, all the nurses and lactation specialists were super helpful in trying to get her latched onto me. Everything worked really well with that for us, like her latch and my ability to nurse her. It was more the issue of I didn't know how to get a baby to latch to me. So literally needed help every single time. Like I would like call somebody and say, okay, like I don't know how to do this. And they're amazing, because I mean they do this all the time. So they just like, I don't say manhandle, but they like woman handle you.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right, and they're like, take your boob and shove her on. And but I needed that, because I had no clue what I was doing. And yeah, so being together, it really did help revive me, and kind of give me that push. One of you mentioned, or Sam, right? One of your babies had jaundice?
Julian did, yeah.
Julian did. So Hattie did too. She ended up being in that machine.
With the light.
The glow lights with their lip mask.
The little tanning goggles.
Yeah, so cute. And that was the first night, or was that her? her second night, where they were going to leave her in the room, probably assuming, they want their baby with them overnight. And that box is so bright that we were like,
like, no.
Can you actually take her out? Because we don't know how to sleep with this box in the room. So I think I'll have to double check with Brian, but I'm pretty sure she didn't stay with us all 4 nights. Just so that, because 2 of them she was in the box, and then the last one, I think one of the nurses was like, if you'd rather get that little bit of extra sleep, we can take her. And we felt bad, but okay.
Yeah, good for you.
So we never had a full night with her there, and I think it was for the best, because I was just still recovering. And to circle back to that with the nurses, I don't know, they just, there were some, like Nicole, you said, you get attached to, and I can't remember names anymore. I know I wrote it down somewhere, but there were like 2 in particular that kind of kept rotating back to me because I was there so long. And when I was with them, I just felt so like safe, secure. They were so patient and kind. And when they would leave and I'd get somebody new, even if they were great, it was emotional.
Yeah. No, I was the same. Like for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just the night nurses, like the overnight, and maybe it's just part of like they have that bedside manner because it's like a quiet, like scary, sad time usually in the middle of the night when you're like figuring it out. Oh, my overnight nurses were amazing. Whatever that like 11 to 7 shift was, or
mine were
whatever.
So bad.
I mean, all my nurses were great, but the overnight ones, they were like, like I cried, and they were there.
You said something earlier, Ashley, that made me think, like, when you felt like you were like doted on extra because of your C-section. And Sam, I'm not sure if you felt that way, but I feel like that is something that was missing for me. Like, okay, you had a baby, no complications, see you later. Like, it wasn't a lot, besides Amy, who was like my favorite. There wasn't a lot of like coaching and helping and support and assistance. It was just sort of like, yeah, you had a baby, figure it out. And maybe it was just the hospital that I was at, but
I think that might be the case because when my friend and I birthed at the same hospital, and she didn't have C-section, more as typical birth, but like completely different experience than me.
Interesting.
Because another thing they had come around was the services to let me know about getting in touch with a therapist for all sorts of postpartum topics, but the biggest one being because of what happened with the birth. And through that, I mean, that's how I got set up with the therapist I have today. And I'm like, I asked my friend, like, did somebody come around to talk to you about this? And she, as far as she knew, no. With the breastfeeding, like, I don't know, I felt so supported and not pushed in any one direction. Like, they just wanted me to do what was best for me and the baby and try to support me in whatever that was. And I feel that other people maybe aren't as supported, or there's an agenda being pushed. Like, you're going to breastfeed, like push, and no pumping, and, or, I don't know. There shouldn't be opinions around it. It should just
there
be.
There shouldn't be, but there are. So
100%.
So I'm sure there's so much more we have to say about postpartum that we will get into in a future episode.
Yes.
But thank you, nurses.
Thank you, nurses, so much.
We are very thankful for nurses.
All right, and we will see you guys in our next episode.
Yay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.